I remember the smell of the rosemary lamb most of all. It filled the Westbrooks dining room, a room that cost more to furnish than my entire law school tuition. My father-in-law, Arthur, sat at the head of the table, swirling a glass. "Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the clink of silver on china. He didn't look at me. He looked at my husband, Julian. "The big table is getting a bit crowded, and since the partners from the firm are here to discuss the merger, we need to keep the conversation high level." I felt Julian's hand stiffen under the table. He knew what was coming. "We've set up a lovely spot for you in the conservatory," my mother-in-law, Beatrice, added with a smile that never reached her eyes. "With the nieces and nephews. You raise so good with them, dear. And let's be honest, business talk is so dreadfully boring if you don't have skin in the game." By skin in the game, she meant millions in annual revenue to them. I was a legal researcher who worked from a laptop in pajamas. I didn't have a corner office in a skyscraper. I had a desk in a guest room. "Dad," Julian started, his face flushing. I squeezed his knee hard. I could have corrected them. I could have told them that my research involved deconstructing federal indictments for Fortune 500 CEOs. I could have mentioned that my hourly rate was higher than the mortgage on their summer home. But there is a specific kind of power in being a ghost. "It is fine, Julian," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. I stood up, picking up my drink. "Cheap vintage they relegated to the lesser guests. The kids have better stories anyway." I walked toward the conservatory, feeling the eyes of the high-level Westbrooks on my back. I could hear Arthur chuckling as I left. "Sweet girl, Julian, quiet, not much of a firebrand, but she'll make a stable wife." The kids' table was a plastic folding nightmare covered in a paper tablecloth. My peers for the evening were 6-year-old Leo, who was currently trying to shove a pea up his nose, and 4-year-old Sophie, who was crying because her juice was the wrong blue. I sat down on a tiny, creaky chair. My knees were practically touching my chin. "Hi, Auntie El," Leo chirped, abandoning the pea. "Are you in trouble too?" "No, Leo," I whispered, watching through the French doors as Arthur held court at the mahogany table. He was spreading out a set of blueprints for the Westbrook Highlands project, a multi-million-dollar development built on a foundation of shaky permits and aggressive land grabs. "I am just watching a movie." "What movie?" I watched Arthur toast to his own genius, unaware that he'd just signed a contract with a shell company I'd been investigating for 3 months. "A tragedy," I said, taking a slow sip of my wine. "But don't worry, the ending is the best part." I spent the next 3 hours cutting crusts off sandwiches and listening to the adults roar with laughter in the other room. They didn't realize that from the conservatory, the acoustics were perfect. I heard every word about their off-the-books labor deals and the creative way they were bypassing environmental impact studies. They thought I was beneath them. In reality, I was just getting the best seat in the house for their deposition. The months following that dinner were a masterclass in what I like to call the slow burn. While the Westbrooks were busy buying vacation homes and bragging about the Highlands project on social media, I was back in my home office. To them, I was just staring at a screen, probably blogging or doing data entry. In reality, I was watching the digital walls close in on them. The first crack didn't come from a courtroom. It came from a headline: "Westbrook Development cited for major environmental irregularities." I saw it on my feed while I was having tea with Beatrice. She laughed it off, waving her manicured hand as if shooing away a fly. "It's just red tape, Eleanor," she sighed, looking at me with that patronizing pity. "The price of being at the top. You wouldn't understand the pressure of managing something this massive. It's a bit more complex than your little projects." I smiled. "I am sure it is, Beatrice. I hope you have a good legal team." "Arthur has the best money can buy," she snapped. "Men who know how to play the game." I went back to my tea. I knew exactly who Arthur's men were. They were high-priced yes men, who excelled at golf but hadn't stepped into a high-stakes courtroom in a decade. They were telling Arthur what he wanted to hear, that he was untouchable. By the 3rd month, the red tape turned into a formal investigation. I started seeing the physical toll it is taking on them. At the Sunday brunches, where I was still relegated to the informal seating area while they whispered in the study, Arthur's face was becoming a permanent shade of bruised purple. He was losing weight. He was snapping at the staff. One afternoon, Julian pulled me aside. He looked terrified. My dad's panicked. Something about a racketeering charge? He says the authorities are overreaching, but they've frozen the construction accounts. He's asking everyone in the family to pitch in to liquidate what we can to keep the firm's lights on. I looked at my husband. He was a good man, but he'd been raised to believe his father was a god. Julian, listen to me, I said, my voice low and firm. Do not give them a dime. Not your savings. Not your siling nothing. But the Ray family. If the business goes under, we lose everything. If you give them that money, you aren't saving a business, I told him. You're just throwing wood into a house that's already on fire. Trust me. He looked at me then, really looked at me. For the first time, he saw the steel in my eyes that the rest of his family had ignored. What do you know, Eleanor? I know that your father sat at the big table and talked too loud about things he should have kept secret, I said. And I know that the person he is up against doesn't care about his last name. The final straw for my quiet act came a week later. The Westbrooks called an emergency family meeting. No kids table this time, not because they gained respect for me, but because they were desperate. They needed a united front for a press photo. They wanted us all there, the loyal, silent family, to show the world they were innocent. As Arthur paced the room, shouting at his lawyers over speakerphone, I sat in the back, tucked into a corner chair, my laptop open. They were asking for a $20 million bond. Arthur screamed, throwing a crystal decanter across the room. It shattered against the fireplace. My lawyers say we have to settle. They say the lead prosecutor, a man named Henderson, is a shark who never loses. I didn't even look up from my screen. Henderson isn't a shark, I said quietly. The room went dead silent. Arthur turned, his eyes bulging. What did you say? He is not a shark, I repeated, finally closing my laptop. He is a bulldog. He'll bite and hold on, but he has a very predictable pattern. He relies on intimidation, because he is too lazy to actually check the chain of custody on digital evidence. Arthur stared at me as if I'd just started speaking in tongues. And how on earth would you know that? Because, I said, standing up and smoothing out my skirt, I am the one who trained him, and I am the only person in this room who knows exactly where he is hiding the evidence that is going to put you in a cage. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of an empire starting to crumble. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Arthur's mouth hung open, his face transitioning from a furious purple to a ghostly, ashen gray. You trained him? Beatrice stammered, clutching her pearls so hard the string looked ready to snap. Eleanor, stop being dramatic. This is a family crisis, not one of your little internet stories. I didn't argue. I simply walked over to the mahogany table, the big table, and pushed Arthur's expensive leather portfolio aside to make room for my laptop. I turned the screen around. This is the internal docket for the state prosecutor's office from 5 years ago, I said, pointing to the lead signatures. Under senior supervising counsel, you'll find my maiden name. I spent 6 years as the head of the white-collar division before I went into private consulting. Marcus Henderson was my junior associate. I gave him his first lead case. I also gave him his first formal reprimand for cutting corners. Arthur leaned in, squinting at the screen. He saw the official seal. He saw my name. He saw the list of high-profile convictions I had secured before I even met his son. You're a senior partner? Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. But Julian said you did research. You're always at home. You're always in your loyal mons. I am a consultant for the top 3 defense firms in the country. Arthur, I said, closing the laptop with a definitive thud. I work from home because I charge $2,000 an hour and I don't need to impress anyone with a skyscraper office, and I wear leggings because I like to be comfortable while I am dismantling federal cases. Julian stood in the doorway, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. He knew I was smart, but he'd never seen me in prosecutor mode. "Why didn't you tell us?" Beatrice shrieked. "We've been living in agony for months. We were facing total ruin, and you just sat there eating your salad while we suffered." I felt a cold, sharp spark of satisfaction. "I tried to tell you, Beatrice. Last Christmas, I tried to warn Arthur about the zoning loopholes. He told me to go sit with the toddlers. 2 months ago, I tried to mention the compliance audit. You told me business talk was too complex for me. You didn't want a lawyer. You wanted a quiet girl who knew her place." Arthur slumped into his chair, the same chair he'd used as a throne to look down on me for years. "Can you fix it?" he asked, his voice stripped of all its usual bravado. "Can you talk to Henderson? Make it go away? Fix it?" I let out a short, dry laugh. "Arthur, the FBI has your server logs. They have the signatures on the Highlands project. Henderson isn't looking for a settlement. He's looking for a trophy. He wants to put a Westbrook in a jumpsuit to make his career." Beatrice began to sob, a harsh, ugly sound. The high-level Westbrooks were finally realizing that their money couldn't buy them out of this. Their expensive yes-men lawyers had already stopped answering their calls. "I can't make it go away," I said, leaning over the table, looking Arthur dead in the eye. "But I can mitigate the damage. I can find the procedural errors in their search warrant. I can negotiate a plea that keeps this family from losing the house and stays out of the headlines. But things are going to change." "Anything?" Arthur whispered. "Just help us." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket. It wasn't a legal brief. It was a list of terms. Step 1: you resign as CEO, effective immediately. Julian takes over the restructuring. Step 2: you issue a formal apology to the staff you tried to scapegoat. And step 3, I paused, looking around the opulent room that had felt like a prison of disrespect for years. "Next Thanksgiving, I am picking the seating chart." The aftermath of a legal explosion isn't like the movies. There are no sudden gavels or dramatic screams. It is a quiet, surgical removal of everything you thought defined you. Over the next 6 months, I dismantled the prosecution as case piece by piece. I didn't do it out of love for Arthur. I did it because it was my job, and I am the best at it. I found the flaw in Henderson's digital trail. A search warrant signed 90 minutes after the servers were accessed. It didn't stand a chance. The charges were downgraded. The heavy fines were settled, using the family's luxury fund, and the prison sentences vanished into probation and community service. The Westbrook empire survived, but it was no longer a kingdom. It was a business. Then came the first family gathering after the settlement. The atmosphere in the Westbrook mansion was different. The air felt thinner, less bloated with ego. Arthur was no longer wearing his custom-tailored suits. He was in a simple sweater, looking every bit the retired man he now was. Beatrice didn't talk about high-level mergers anymore. She mostly talked about her garden. As we walked in, Beatrice approached me. She didn't offer a patronizing cheek kiss. She stopped to feed away and waited for me to acknowledge her. "The table is set, Eleanor," she said softly. I walked into the dining room. The kids' table, that flimsy plastic eyesore, was gone. In its place was the massive, shimmering mahogany table. But the seating had changed. Arthur wasn't at the head. He was tucked away in the middle, looking like a guest in his own home. Julian sat to my left. I sat at the head of the table. "I took the liberty of ordering the catering," I said, looking at the menu I'd prepared. "No lamb tonight. We were having something a bit more grounded." The meal was silent for the first 10 minutes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but a respectful one. The power had shifted so completely that they didn't even know how to start a conversation without my lead. "Eleanor," Arthur said, clearing his throat. He looked at his wine glass, then at me. "I wanted to. The firm's quarterly reports came in. Julian says the new ethics board you installed is actually increasing our investor confidence. We ray up 10%. Integrity is a better long-term investment than ego. Arthur, I said, taking a sip of water. I thought a man of your level would know that. He winced, but he didn't snap back. He couldn't. I owe you more than a thank you, he muttered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. I was a fool. I saw a quiet girl and I thought I saw a small mind. I've spent my life looking for heavy hitters in boardrooms, and I didn't realize the most dangerous person I knew was the one cutting crusts off sandwiches in the conservatory. I looked around the room. These people had spent years making me feel invisible. They had used their wealth as a yardstick for human value, never realizing that the person they were stepping on was the only one holding the floor up. Apology accepted, Arthur, I said. I stood up and walked over to the sideboard, picking up a small, wrapped gift. I handed it to Leo, my nephew, who was sitting at the big table for the first time. What is this, Auntie El? He asked. It's a set of building blocks, I said, looking at Arthur. The real kind. The kind where if you don't build the foundation right, the whole thing falls down no matter how pretty you paint the roof. I sat back down and looked directly into the camera lens, or at least, that is how it felt in my mind. The lesson was simple. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never, ever assume that the person sitting at the small table isn't the one who owns the house. If you enjoyed this story of karma and the ultimate legal revenge, make sure to hit that like button. Have you ever been underestimated by people who thought they were above you? Let me know your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. And remember, the quietest person in the room is usually the one with the most to say. I'll see you in the next one.